Welcome to Conversations. We're coming from the beautiful Loren Rogers Museum in Laurel, Mississippi, and we're very honored to have Victoria Bynum with us. Of course, an author and lecturer at Texas State University in San Marcos, where you've now retired, believe it or not. You retired at a very young age, but you've also written a book now that is a teenager, I guess. It's been out for a few years, but The Free State of Jones. And of course, we are sitting right in the middle of the Free State of Jones, so that makes this even more special. But it's also going to be a brand new movie. Universal bought the rights for the book, and it's going to be starring Matthew McConaughey, and Gary Ross is going to be directing it. Congratulations, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's just delightful to be here. I need to make one correction. Okay. Universal kind of backed out of the movie,
they backed out. Okay.
STX Entertainment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
So that's what I get for trusting the internet.
That's
not
right,
a good thing. Believe everything you read.
It just happened a year ago, so it's real news.
But that's exciting, though. Matthew McConaughey and Gary Ross, who did Seabiscuit and The Hunger Games. So he's pretty expert at taking books and turning them into movies.
He is. He has a great track record, and he's been involved with this since the very beginning, of wanting to be the person who directed it and wrote the screenplay, and he did write the screenplay.
Yeah. So, but even though you didn't necessarily write the screenplay, you did get some lines in the movie, and you and your husband got to be in the movie. Talk about that experience.
Well, it was a great experience, a lot of fun, and I did get a couple of lines. I read some Bible verses to a dying soldier, and believe me, I worked really hard on getting those lines right, and it made me feel really good when Gary Ross said, "You did a great job." Oh, wow. After only 4 takes.
After 4 takes, that's good. The crew right now is nodding, saying, "Wow, we wish Marshall could do less than 4 takes. That'd be great."
Yeah, and my husband got to play a Confederate officer of unspecified rank. He was in 2 days of scenes, or 2 different scenes, I should say, on 2 different days. So yeah, and then we just watched everything we could watch, spent 12 hours on the set like they all do, and really saw that people making movies work very, very hard and very long hours.
What's phenomenal about the moving and the casting is how incredibly much Matthew McConaughey looks like the hero of the story, and of course the person that you wrote about, Newt. I mean, what a great name, Newt Knight. I mean, it sounds like a Hollywood name anyway, but Matthew, he does. It's just uncanny how much he looks like him.
I was very surprised by it too. The minute he grew that beard and newspapers started putting the pictures side by side, I was really struck by it too, really, really impressed by it.
And I love how you drove into the movie set and you saw him there and you were just kind of like, you really are like, well, I know who Matthew McConaughey is, but he's like a normal human being. You know, I would have been so starstruck, I probably would have run off the road and hit a tree.
Well, we both were. My husband was the one who recognized him driving by on one of those little vehicles that they go by, and I can't think of the name of it. Yeah, there he was. The first person we saw practically was Matt McConaughey, and he was really busy on set that day. They were doing the Battle of Corinth.
Yeah.
And boy, the number of takes they do on all those scenes, and the amount of energy that it takes.
Amazing. This is a homecoming for you in a way. Your dad is from Jones County, was born here, and so for you to get to come back and present this topic with family members, actually, believe it or not. Talk about that experience, and that was what drove you to write the book, wasn't it?
Well, you know, it's not what drove me to write the book. It was being a historian who had written a first book that included 2 chapters on a Southern Unionist uprising in North Carolina. And in the back of my mind, I had only learned about the Free State of Jones as a college student pretty late in life, you know, so I knew that Jones County had a similar story as the story that I had just told in North Carolina, and I thought, I've gotten my first book done, I'm a bona fide historian, I'm going to go write about something personal. And so the personal part of it was important. Yeah. And I had no idea, however, that there were 2 Bynums in the night band. Yeah. You know, I did not know that, and in fact one of them was shot by the Confederacy for desertion, Tapley Bynum. I didn't know that. And I really did not know many of my relatives in Jones County. My dad had left as a young man, joined the Navy. We only went back on visits, and so I now know Jones County far better today than I ever did, and I'm still meeting relatives that have figured out our genealogy and come up and introduce themselves to me. And I love it. It did change my life to rediscover my dad's roots, or in some ways discover them for the first time.
You know, you look at Jones County, and of course I learned about the Free State of Jones as soon as I moved to Mississippi, because it's not just a place, it's an attitude. You see Jones County Junior College, when all the other junior colleges are community colleges in Mississippi, except for Jones County Junior College. But there is an air of independence here in Jones County that really, truly is hard to explain. But it's one that even today, if you study it, it kind of permeates back to that time, back into the 1860s. Talk about Newt Knight, what drove him, what drove the rebellion, what drove, because I think it's a lot of people were very tempted to put it saying it's an abolitionist movement or it was a secession movement, but it's not that simple, is it?
No, it's not. And what you've been describing about Jones County, I refer to as anti-authoritarian attitudes.
Yeah.
There's a tradition of it, and it's the reason why I took the story back to the Revolutionary War. I wanted to know, what are the roots of these people, and are they that different from other Southerners? And really, there are pockets like this throughout the South, but Jones County descendants do have a long tradition of anti-authoritarian attitudes and stands along the ways. What really fascinated me was to be able to take them back to the Revolutionary era and find so many of them part of a movement known as the Regulator Movement, which actually came before the Revolution, where a lot of them were, standing up to corrupt officials, taking their stand and refusing to do what they were told, to, abide by the conventional dictates. And then you take it up to Newt Knight and you see another anti-authoritarian stance against the Confederacy. And one of the things that's often lost is this is not just a stand for, this is me talking as a historian and what I've seen. I don't see a stand taken against all authority. I see a choice made here that the Confederacy is not the legitimate government. It is destroying us, destroying our lives. And they do support the U.S. government, and they said so. They said so openly. If you go into the records of the claims files, you have many depositions from Newt Knight and from many of the men, and they are making it clear that they were Unionist supporters of the Union. The reason I'm emphasizing that is that a lot of times people say they really weren't for either side, they just wanted to be left alone. Well, they did want to be left alone, but they did take a side, and I think it's important historically to recognize that.
You mentioned the Battle of Corinth, and there were so many people in this part. I think a lot of people don't realize that this was the one county that had the lowest percentage of slaves, like 12%.
That's right.
In Mississippi. It was also the one county that the one person who voted against secession in Mississippi when it voted secede was from this area. So there was that degree. I think people just felt like they didn't have an economic interest in it. They were saying, well, we don't have slaves, we don't really need to do that hassle. But they still went to fight anyway. Like you mentioned the Battle of Corinth, but yet they thought the war was going to be over quickly, and it wasn't. So that was part of what drove the fact that they were disenchanted, correct?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a Jones County resident who was closely associated with Newt Knight, and he was once the mayor of Laurel at a certain point. Matty Bush, he's interviewed, yes. And I think he does the best job of saying why they joined the Confederacy. For one thing, they wanted to be in the units with each other. They wanted to be with their brothers and their neighbors. And many of them did think the war would be over pretty quickly. And who wants to get arrested, and who wants to be, once conscription was in place, you just wanted to get it over with. But then the battles, Corinth, you mentioned Corinth, were much worse than anything they could imagine. They just decided they're going to go on home. And one of the descendants said they basically walked home from Corinth, and nobody, basically for the first year of when desertion started, objected to it much. It was as the war went on that then the efforts to capture deserters and punish them became a real goal of the Confederacy, because they were just losing so many men.
20-to-1 rule. If you owned 20 slaves, then you could get out of having to fight. That really set Newt Knight off, didn't it?
Yes, it did, and that's only one of the many laws or Confederate laws that were being passed. There were, in-kind taxes. There was the ability of the Army to come and take your livestock, take your produce. And then there was this 20 Negro law, which was just the final straw. I mean, well, for one thing, you could buy your way out of the Army. You could buy a substitute. But then the 20 Negro law allowed you to get an exemption based on how many slaves you owned. And so the largest slaveholders had the easiest time not fighting in the war. And that's when, according to Newt Knight, his first sergeant in the night band, Jasper Collins, said to him, with the passage of the 20 Negro law right on the heels of Corinth and Iuka, those awful battles, He said, "That's it. This is what makes it. This makes it a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. I'm done."
Right.
And Newt said, "I figured he was right," and he decided to go on home too. So he and Jasper.
You know, it's funny. I think that's why people need to study history, because it sounds very much like something Creedence Clearwater Revival would have sung about during Vietnam. But that's the thing. This is, like I said, this whole element of what happened with Knight's band and with Newt Knight could very easily kind of happen today.
Oh, I think so, yes, in another context. I saw a letter to the editor once where someone was saying about the Jones County, hey, think about the Vietnam War, made that very comparison. There were a lot of boys, there are a lot of boys now, because this is when the war was going on that this letter was written, who don't see this as their war either, and made that parallel.
Major McLemore, that was kind of what got it all started. Talk about that, and talk about who he was and how he changed Newt Knight's life.
Okay.
No, actually, let me rephrase that. How Newt Knight changed his life. Yeah.
Yes, that is more accurate.
Yeah, I think it's the other way around.
Yeah. Well, Amos McLemore was, I think he lived in neighboring Perry County, but he certainly had Jones County ties as well. And Amos McLemore was kind of a rising member of the merchant class. Amos Deason, there were different members there that were kind of the movers and shakers. And he was opposed to secession, like many Jones County people were at first, but once secession happened, he decided to make a career out of the military, and his assignment was to come back and hunt down deserters. And that, of course, made him an easily recognizable person. First of all, the McLemores were already known in the county, and here's Amos McLemore back hunting down deserters. Yeah. And the story is that Newt Knight and two of his cousins who were members of the band, or the band really didn't exist yet, but were hiding out in the woods together. Yeah. They shot him in the Deason house. This is where the fame of the Deason house of Ellisville comes in place. It was the home of Amos Deason, the Confederate representative, and Amos McLemore was eating dinner there that night, sitting around in a rocking chair. And supposedly Newt Knight and his buddies shot him through. If you hate Newt Knight, you say he sneaked in through the window. If you support Newt Knight, you say he did it from the front. So it's either he shot him in the back or he shot him in the front. This is where I love all the different versions that tell, how people feel about him. But that was on October 5th, 1863, that Amos McLemore was killed. And on October 13th, just a week later, the Knight Band was officially formed, and that's when they took their code, or they promised to each other that they would support the U.S. government. This has often been morphed into being secession from the Confederacy.
Right.
You know, the legend that they seceded from the Confederacy and even drew up documents. That is something that none of the facts support. And the facts include Newt Knight's own words and Jasper Collins' own words that no, we never seceded from the Confederacy. And also in the claims files that I alluded to earlier, they describe very clearly what they did. They got together and they subscribed to an oath of allegiance to the U.S. government. And I think that has, as I said, that sort of transitioned into this somehow being that they seceded from the Confederacy. But the way they saw it was they had never entered the Confederacy. They believed very strongly that their delegate, who was pledged to vote against secession, caved in on the third vote, I believe it was, and voted for it. And there were actually about 10 counties of delegates who held out till the very end. And neighboring Perry County was one of them. Perry County remained very forcefully against secession, voting against it. So anyway, that's the beginning of the band.
For 2 years. They existed for 2 years, and they've, of course, if you've ever seen the Leaf River, they were in the swamps of Leaf River. They got a lot of aid from somebody who became a very important part of Newt Knight's life, Rachel. Tell us a little bit about Rachel.
Well, Rachel was the slave, originally the slave of Newt Knight's grandfather, who was one of the largest slaveholders of the area, which is one of the interesting facts about it. Jackie Knight, Jackie is his nickname. She was his slave. He willed her on to. He died just very early in the war, and I think even actually right before secession or right afterwards. But he left her in a will to one of his other sons, Jesse. Jesse Davis Knight, whose name has been changed to Jefferson Davis Knight by the people who support the Confederacy.
Of course.
It was Jesse Davis Knight. Okay, Rachel had, according to all the stories, family stories, she had her first 2 or 3 children were fathered by Jesse Davis Knight. And then she became Newt Knight's ally during the war. And then later, of course, entered into a relationship with him, has several children by Newt Knight. And that's where the two stories, the one story of an insurrection and the other story of a mixed race community, I mean, that's where they converge in this alliance during the Civil War.
It's so interesting because, I mean, this whole story, and one of the things I like about your book is you don't just focus on the Civil War years. You tell the whole story from the Revolutionary War up until pretty much the middle part of the 20th century, because this is a story that really, what happened during the Civil War had ramifications even for the descendants of Newt Knight.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's a story that I think the origins go back to the Revolutionary War, as I was saying earlier, but then the effects of all of this, they're still with us today, but they definitely move up into the civil rights movement, because in that 1948 Davis Knight case, where it anticipates the whole striking down by the Supreme Court of the illegality of interracial marriages, but it precedes that by about 20 years.
He was on trial. Davis Knight was Newt's grandson, correct?
Great-grandson.
Great-grandson, okay. He was on trial because he was about to marry a white woman.
He did marry her.
He did marry a white woman, and they said he had one-eighth African-American blood in him. And so, but it was, a lot of it was driven by the movie Taproots, wasn't it? Because that raised awareness. And Taproots was a major motion picture about,
and a novel, and then a motion picture.
Yeah, so.
And Newt Knight was well on the way to becoming a heroic figure in Jones County. And James Street, who wrote Taproots, had a lot to do with that. And then Tom Knight wrote his worshipful biography of his father really in 1935, but he brought it back out after Taproots came out because the context was even more favorable to his dad. So you had both Tom Knight's book and Taproots. And so the way that I hear it is somebody did decide to get back at the family by going after this interracial marriage. It certainly wasn't the first. Many Knights considered themselves to be white. They did not consider they looked white, and they did not consider their small amount of African ancestry to be a reason to consider themselves black. And of course, in segregated America, why would they? I mean, they had everything to lose. And so the difference for Davis Knight is he stayed in the area, which was always risky because people knew his genealogy. Yeah. And so, yes.
In Mississippi, that shocks me.
Yeah, yes. And he stayed right in the same neighborhood, basically. Yeah. They went right down to the courthouse and got married. And the woman who married them was also one of the witnesses, and she said, "Well, we can't very well ask him their race. He looked white. He had a white woman with him. There was a bunch of white relatives with her. What was I to do?"
Wow. Of course, Newt Knight's attitude, I think, was changed by the war, and he didn't really care. I mean, he seemed to be kind of one of those kind of guys that no matter what was thrown at him, he was going to be pretty much, I'm going to do it my way. That'd be the best way to describe him.
Yeah, he remained very iconoclastic.
Yeah. And he lived up until the 1920s. I mean, he lived a long, long life.
He did. Yeah. He made a very interesting statement in about 1892 that shows that his frustrations with the U.S. government, that it would not compensate him. He petitioned the government for compensation for 30 years. 1892, he was kind of at the tail end of it, and it was pretty clear he and his men were not going to get any pay for having been Unionists. And he actually said in an interview, it's in an obscure newspaper, but thank goodness somebody got it to me. Yeah. But he made the remark that he really believed that the non-slaveholders should have just risen up and killed the slaveholders rather than agree to fight their war. And he talked about the abolitionists in the North. He talked about the abolitionist women and how they had turned a lot of people against slavery, and that there were even Southerners who were involved in the Underground Railroad. He made an allusion to it. And it's just a very interesting Newt Knight, who's approaching his 60s at that point, who's saying, that basically if he had to do it all over again, he would just revolt against the slaveholders. Wow. Wow. And I think some of this was predicated on his disgust with the federal government that didn't appreciate him and his men the way they should. The fighting they had done.
You got to come back home, more or less. I mean, where your dad's home, but to be able to present and talk to the people here in Jones County about the book and about the history. How were you received? Was everybody interested because you mentioned that you never heard about the story the whole time you were growing up until you were in college. So
That's right.
because that's the funny thing about the South. Sometimes we don't talk about things that we might feel a little bit uncomfortable about. But were the questions great? How was everybody?
Are you talking about this time back or my first time back after?
Oh no, well the first time back, but this time back, I guess the first time back would have been the most important one.
Well, yeah, I spoke at the University of Southern Mississippi. At the history department brought me in when the book was first published, and there was a great turnout there. Ethel Knight was still alive, and she was sitting in the front row.
Yeah, that's, no pressure there.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure.
Well, you know what? The fortunate thing was I didn't recognize her.
Oh, that's good news.
Afterwards, somebody, I had met her, but she had her hair very different, and of course, I'm thinking about my talk, and I just plain didn't recognize her. I saw her, but that was a good reception. I enjoyed it a lot, but people have learned a lot more about the story since then. I mean, I'm really struck by the difference between 2001 and, of course, here we are, 2015. There's much more excitement about it, I think, today than then. The movie, of course, has a lot to do with that. But there's also been more things written along the way, and so there's been a momentum growing over time.
Yeah, and the movie, of course, you're going to, I hope, get to go to the premiere.
Well, I've been told that. I hope I get an official invitation. Yeah, Gary Ross.
You're in the movie? I mean, come on.
Yeah, Gary Ross did tell me that I would get an invitation. In fact, he told me to go shop for my dress, so
that's
I guess that's official enough.
That's awesome. And of course, like for you, this was a personal journey as well because you got to run into some of your family members and get to know them better. Talk about the reaction to the movie coming out by the people that are involved, the family members, your family members, the Knight family members. Talk about that. Are they nervous or are they excited about it or what's?
Well, the descendants of Newt and Rachel, I would call very excited about it, but with the reasonable sort of caveats of, it brings them a lot of attention.
Yeah.
They sometimes, I sometimes try to imagine what it's like to go in the grocery store and you see somebody now wearing a T-shirt with Newt Knight's face on it, and that's your great-great-grandfather,
Yeah.
And so there's, I'm sure, and I can't speak for them, but I think there is a sense of a loss of privacy.
Yeah.
And for many years, there were many Knights, descendants of Newt and Rachel, who would not talk about the story either.
Yeah.
I mean, they had been brought up on the same idea of, this man committed treason, this man did this, did that. And so I don't think it was easy for anybody to just simply say, oh, at last our story is going to be told to the world.
Right.
But I think as time has gone on, they've more and more appreciated that this is our history, and it's important history. And when you have historians coming in and writing about it, that sort of legitimizes that and verifies that it is important history. And so I think more and more they really are very excited about it. They were very excited to be in the movie. A good number of them were in the movie.
Oh, were they really?
Oh,
wow.
yeah, several of them. They got to be in the Davis Knight trial scene, as extras, watching the dramatization of the Davis Knight trial.
So when we're watching the movie, we look around at the people in the trial and think those are really his ancestors.
Right, a good number of them are.
That's a nice touch.
Yeah.
That's
I
really
think
a
so
nice
too.
touch.
And I think the way that Gary Ross uses the trial to kind of have everybody come on the stand and tell their version of Newt Knight is a way of dealing with all the different strands of legend and truth about Newt Knight. I think that's a very a good way to approach that.
And
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
As I'm reading your book, I'm thinking, wow, they're going to fit this into a movie because there's a lot of time, so they're going to have to compress, but that is a really nice way to structure that.
I think so,
Yeah,
yes.
that'll be good. Well, congratulations. Like I said, it's nice when your baby grows up to be a teenager and then gets recognized by Hollywood.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what this is like.
It's been a living history for me. I thought I was just writing a book and there'd be a year or two of really, interesting reactions, and then like most books, it would go quiet, but it hasn't gone quiet.
I mean, as a researcher, you like studying things that go against the grain, whether it's involving race or sex or anything else, particularly during the Civil War and a lot of your research. What's next for you? What's your next project?
Well, I did a follow-up book, as you say. I love doing dissent and people that go against the grain. I started with the book on North Carolina called Unruly Women.
Right.
And then Free State of Jones.
What a great title, by the way. I love that.
When it came to me, I thought, I think this will work.
That'll
and
work,
the press agreed. So, and then I did another book called The Long Shadow of the Civil War, and it's also on Southern descent. And it actually continues the story of the Free State of Jones, a lot of the things that I discovered later. I put into discrete essays. It's not it's a book of essays,
Yeah.
but they are all about Southern dissenters. And I also included a lot on Texas in there, and that's where I've been working now, because there's another band, and
Yeah.
believe it or not, the leaders of this band that I wrote about in Texas are the brothers of Jasper Collins.
Oh, wow.
And they moved to
Yeah.
Texas in the 1850s, and the unionism is just as strong.
You mean to tell me that people in Texas are ornery? I'm shocked.
Yes, they're pretty ornery, yeah. These guys are in East Texas, and they hid out in the Big Thicket, what's called the Big Thicket.
Yes.
And
East
so,
Texas, you gotta love it.
yeah, I've been working on that and doing a few other articles and that sort of thing. I don't have a book planned. I've been
Yeah.
really enjoying.
But you're a regular blogger.
And I'm a regular blogger, and,
Yeah.
and that's going to stay on my radar, I think, for a while.
That'll be great. That'll
Yeah.
be great. Well, I look forward to the movie, and that's going to be so much fun. And I look forward to your scene in the movie too. Yeah.
Thank you. I do too.
I smell Oscar.
Maybe for Gary Rod.
Well, okay. Well, you know, we got to dream big. And by the way, I failed to mention the fact that your husband Gary also has written a fantastic song.
Greg.
Greg, did I
Yes.
say Gary?
Yeah,
I
that's
said,
all
I
right.
was thinking about the director. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, your husband Greg. Sorry about that. Don't tell Greg that I just married you off to someone else. So, but they've written a fantastic song about.
He has. He wrote it actually in 2005 because he was my research assistant.
Yeah.
We're both historians, and so we always accompany one another. But he's also a songwriter and has a band called Dr. G and the Mudcats. And he
Yeah.
wrote Jones County Jubilee and recorded it in 2005. And yeah, we got it played on the radio yesterday on 2 radio shows. And
That's
it's
fantastic.
It's a wonderful song.
That's
Yeah.
great. Vicki, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
This is Conversations. I'm Marshall Ramsey, and join us next week.